All right, hey everyone, welcome to the first West Watch of 2024. I'm Joe Casola, who I'll be hosting and speaking today. Looks like we have a few people trickling in, so I'll wait before I introduce West Watch as well as our featured speaker, Szumylo.
Welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Asia. I'm the NOAA West Regional Coordinator and really happy to be here with you today.
Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started with some of this intro material. Today we're going to talk about what is NOAA West. And before I get into that, let's talk about what is West Watch. What is this webinar? It's a monthly webinar series that brings together NOAA staff and our partners from across the Western region to share information about climate observations and impacts. We have two formats. We started doing that last year and we're going to continue in 2024. We'll have panels that do a deeper dive on specific topics, and then a general climate overview. This month is the specific topic format. Next month, February, we'll do the climate overview, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about with the El Nino event that is continuing to chug along. Today, we're really happy to have Asia Szumylo with us, who is the NOAA West Regional Coordinator, and she'll give an overview of the Regional Collaboration Network, as well as some of the activities that are on tap for this year in NOAA West. I'll be speaking after that about one specific project, the heat pilots that we engaged in last year, and I'll talk about that work as well as what will be coming on the heat resilience front hopefully in 2024. Some housekeeping. I'm going to ask one quick poll question of everyone, and launch that in a second. Asia, I'll each speak for about 15 minutes. You can enter in questions at any time during the questions box. We'll do a Q&A in between our talks as well as at the end. And our session will be recorded and posted for future viewing. We also have a post-webinar survey, and we appreciate your feedback. But for right now, we're going to do our one poll question. Hopefully, the poll is available for everyone. Just the question of, have you been to West Watch previously? Okay, it looks like we have kind of an even split between folks who are new and those who have been on before. So thanks a lot for filling that out. I also wanted to show, I hate it when people ask me questions and surveys and polls and then I don't get to see some of the output. So I have a few stats from last year's West Watch that I just wanted to share. This first graph is the number of attendees that we had in each West Watch. We didn't have West Watch in November, December because of the holidays, so we just had 10 sessions. But you can see we had a pretty steady attendance, usually around 75 people getting on, with a big spike in July when we had our atmospheric rivers seminar. We also had a really great turnout where we cleared 100 attendees for marine heat waves. Most of our attendees are NOAA folks or NOAA affiliates, with the Weather Service and the fisheries folks being our largest line office represented, which kind of makes sense. In the West, those are most of our NOAA employees. The usefulness scores, which is one of the questions that we ask at the end of the webinar, was pretty good. We usually had scores around 4 out of 5, and we usually had very positive scores about folks would attend our West Watch in the future. Those are a little self-selecting, you know, not everybody fills out the poll, but we still appreciate that those that did fill it out had positive feedback. from that first question that I asked, this is the poll results of whether people were new. And during the course of 2023, we had lots of new people. Usually more than half the folks on the line were new, with a little bit of a dive down at the end. But I think we've been attracting, I interpret this as we have been good at attracting new folks. And then towards the end of the year, we actually might have had more return attendees, which is a good sign. And for comparison, prior to 2023, usually we only had about 30 or 40 people on the line for a West Watch. So we're excited about the growth in the audience and hope we have more growth in 2020. If anybody has any questions or wants to follow up afterwards, here's my email. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions or feedback directly. But at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Asia so she can give her presentation. And Asia, if you just want to tell me when to advance, I will be happy to drive the slides.
Great. All right, well, thank you, everyone. So I'm here today to tell everyone about NOAA West, which is one of the regions of the NOAA Regional Collaboration Network. So those of you familiar with NOAA know that we're organized largely by discipline. So we have several different groups that we call line offices that focus on different parts of ocean and atmospheric observation and management. And we don't really have regional constructs except for the NOAA Regional Collaboration Network, which I'll share some more information with you about today. So Joe, if you go to the next slide. And so this first slide, our mission is the Regional Collaboration Network's mission is to identify, communicate, and respond to regional needs, catalyze collaboration, and connect people and capabilities to advance NOAA's mission and priorities. So we do this by coordinating and connecting people inside of NOAA, so inside of the agency across those different discipline areas that I mentioned, within a regional geography, and then across our partner organizations that we deal with across our different offices. And so some of that is to reduce redundancy and overlapping connections that we make with the same group across our different discipline areas. So next slide, and that is a picture of our last in-person meeting that we had all together, has some of our Central Region team members that we met in La Jolla, California. At the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. So this, I'm holding this slide up here. This is the NOAA West regional team. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how the regional teams are formed, but again, they include staff members who do team membership as a collateral duty to their main job. I listed the team members that are on the NOAA West team right now and their line office. So again, the NOAA discipline affiliation. So hopefully you see a name that you recognize up there. We also have two partner members, so Tim Brown from the Western Regional Climate Center and Shauna O, who's the current California Sea Grant director. We have a rotating membership from a Sea Grant representative from Washington, Oregon, or California for every year. And then we also have representation inside the NOAA Sea Grant program. Becky Briggs is our regional representative on the NOAA side of Sea Grant. So yeah, hopefully you see someone you know. If you see any of the names that anybody that you recognize there, you're welcome to reach out to them for answers on topics that may reach into other discipline areas outside of the one that you contact them on. And then I'll talk a little bit about this, but I've highlighted 3 names on this slide. So I'm the one full-time employee. So the regional coordinator is the one full-time employee of each regional team. So I manage all of the team's activities, all the connection and coordination across all these different discipline areas. We also have 2 regional team leads for the West because the West is such a large territory, but usually there's 1 regional team lead, and they're usually a senior leader in the organization who helps steer the activities of the team overall. So next slide. I want to tell you a bit about the Regional Collaboration Network structure, just so that you can see how we come together and what this looks like at the national scale. So we have a national team lead currently. That's Louisa Koch, who is who holds another full-time job as the NOAA Office of Education Director, but then also holds as a collateral duty her responsibilities as the national team lead for the Regional Collaboration Network. Her job is to connect back to the NOAA headquarters level folks about the activities that we do across the country. We're guided by an overall advisory council that includes the regional team leads that I mentioned on the last slide and our regional coordinator. So that's third and fourth names, big titles down on that list in the yellow box on the left side of the screen. The larger advisory council includes all of the regional team leads and the regional coordinators. And then down at the bottom of that box, there are headquarters liaisons, so staff that sit at the policy level at each of the NOAA discipline area offices and sits on our regional council or advisory council together with us. And then there are team members who are involved in things inside of the region at the regional level, but then aren't connected to the national level work. So, again, the structure is these separate teams around the country that all get together that cascade up to a national level team that includes representation from every single region. And then you can see the regions in the map on the right-hand side of the screen. So we're the West. So when I shorthand this to people, I describe us as the states west of Colorado. So we include two really different biological climatic regions, or more if you want to break it out even differently than that. But I usually think of it as the Intermountain West, so the states west of to the east of the coastal states, and then the three coastal states, which are really, really diverse. Alaska is a single state region. The Pacific Islands region, here looks crunched together, but is actually much more massive than any other region if you count the water mass that's encompassed in that region. And then the remaining regions, I guess things to note that are remarkable about them are that the central region in particular has mostly National Weather Service staff because NOAA's ocean interests aren't really located there. And with that, I'll go to the next slide. So I want to tell you about give you a couple examples of the types of projects that we do to support the region as a whole. And I have two that or this one that's really focused on NOAA internally, really focused on NOAA internal staff and creating relationships internally, and then two that are more focused outside of the agency and to engage our constituents and partner organizations. So this first one is the NOAA West Leadership Program. So a couple years ago at one of our team meetings where we all got together, there was discussion that the West in particular lacked leadership development opportunities compared to the eastern side of the country. A lot of leadership development opportunities are focused around headquarters, career trajectories, focused on the congressional cycle, and into getting into leadership positions at the highest levels of the organization at the headquarters level, rather than the range of types of positions that are important to the range of offices that are in the West. So we worked together to start a regional leadership program, and we're on our second cohort and going into our third soon. But the leadership program pulls in 18 participants from all of the NOAA disciplines in our region. And then connects them for an 18-month leadership program. We keep costs for the leadership program down by recruiting faculty members from inside of NOAA. So we recruit leaders both throughout the nation, but with a pretty strong emphasis on leaders in the Western region to teach leadership courses and really to teach about what they how the leadership principles that they're teaching show up in their life within NOAA. So someone teaching a class on feedback, for example, might really talk about how they use feedback in real time in their office relationships, and then through the employee evaluation cycle within NOAA. So really contextualizing leadership development concepts in our language and really particular to NOAA. The primary leadership development activity that the cohorts each do are capstone projects, and the NOAA West regional team actually supports those capstone projects as part of our overall team activities for a given year. So in supporting the leadership program, we kind of expand our capacity to do additional work to support the region. This current class graduates in April 2023, and we're about to call for new applicants for the third cohort starting in September 2024. And some of the great capstone projects that this group has worked on. One example, if you guys saw it ever in the past, was the Picture Climate Change Student Photo Contest. The current group is working on a climate action plan for the Western Regional Center, so the Seattle NOAA campus, to list potential activities that reduce the carbon footprint of that campus overall. So a really broad range of works that that focus on supporting Western NOAA assets. So next slide. We have a program area this year that we're calling Seed to Tree Relationship and Resource Development. And so all of this is focused on nurturing Western relationships that support diverse youth pursuing careers at NOAA and in NOAA disciplines. We actually don't, we don't really care if people go on to work in other organizations necessarily, but are really happy for people to, launch into their studies with NOAA in mind as a potential employer. And so we're doing this by building better relationships with a handful of organizations in particular in the West. And the 3 that we identified this year, rather than trying to build relationships everywhere, we're trying to really deepen relationships with specific organizations first, and then we'll shift our attention next year to a couple of additional organizations. So the things we're focusing on this year, the organizations that we're focusing on this year are the Ocean Discovery Institute that's located near San Diego, and that picture at the, Joe is actually in the picture in the upper right-hand side of the screen. He's wearing the pink plaid shirt in that photo, but we went to the Ocean Discovery Institute to do some service work with them during our last in-person meeting. In that picture, they're assembling packets for the leadership development program that the Ocean Discovery Institute runs. We did a couple of other support work preparing them for their summer programming for the upcoming year. So they, again, they expose youth in, diverse youth in San Diego, in a specific community in San Diego, to STEM careers, not limited to science work, but just to any type of career path that ultimately supports scientific work. So the Aquarium of the Pacific is another one. They have a pretty strong, they're located in Long Beach, California, have a very strong diversity pipeway pathway program that's run through the aquarium and through a few high schools in Long Beach, California. And then the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission has also been doing a lot of work to recruit tribal youth to STEM careers. So we've been trying to engage and support with that effort as well. We run a NOAA program, not NOAA West, but NOAA runs a program called the Hollings Prep Program that is a pre-Hollings scholarship program that welcomes freshmen, college freshmen, to prepare them for into an internship in NOAA as a stepping stone into eventually applying for the full Hollings program. And so it's a shorter summer internship experience for freshmen to both give them experience inside of the agency and then connect them with a mentor to support them in the Hollings application process later on. And so some of the relationships that we're building with these organizations is to highlight this program and draw students into the Hollings Prep program to eventually pull them into Hollings. And then we're trying to also build up our presence and associate with some of the groups that are going to conferences that expose diverse youth to NOAA as a potential career pathway. So 2 that we're trying to target this year are SACNAS and ACES. And then the last thing we're doing is developing Western focused outreach materials describing NOAA careers. So there are a couple career pathways, like incident meteorologists who support wildfire meteorology that are really Western type jobs. So we're trying to build profiles of NOAA employees and tell about their pathway into the agency as marketing material to show people that it takes all kinds of people to do these jobs and that there are a lot of ways to get into the agency if you're interested in this type of work overall. And so I wanted to, highlight this area of work. In particular, if you guys want to add into questions or reach out later with organizations that you see doing this kind of work with youth in communities that you're associated with. We don't know about all of them and would love to continue to connect to more organizations. Again, the 3 that we picked are ones that we had established relationships with, but we're always looking to expand the set of agencies that we're doing this kind of relationship building and recruitment work with in the future. Next slide. And then one last program that I'll highlight that we're doing is we're calling it the Hyperlocal Climate Primer pilot project, which is a mouthful right now, and we're trying to get climate out of the name in part to make it as widely accessible a product and an initiative as possible, but the goal of that project is to create a local scale resource for NOAA staff to ensure that everyone in our organization is conversant in climate issues and can connect to partners and connect our partners to those important services that we offer inside of NOAA. And so we are starting by focusing on 2 weather forecast office geographies. So the Eureka Weather Forecast Office and the San Diego Weather Forecast Offices stepped up as the first 2 pilot weather forecast offices for us to do that work. So we're going to include information about interpreting climate phenomenon, but then also not limit that to weather, also include other information, make other information readily available to our staff, like shoreline change information and fisheries data. And the idea here isn't to make everybody an expert in all the disciplines that NOAA supports, but it's really to create a resource that allows NOAA staff to better connect people who approach us for information to the resources that we have inside of the organization. And so we'll do that through building and sharing better training resources around climate issues. We'll also create some basic resources like talking points and slide decks that people can pull quickly to use for presentations to the public or for displaying information to people that reach out to us. And then we're also planning to gather local pictures and stories to tell about resilience, and a list of resources for people. So we are an information agency. We don't often do the response work associated with climate phenomenon, but there are a lot of state and local level agencies that do that work. So the idea is for at least starting with Eureka and San Diego, is to pull together that resource information. For example, resources for hardening a house against wildfires, or resources for example, municipal energy grants for individual households that might be beneficial to people who deal with different climate extremes that we're all facing right now. And so with that, I think that is my last slide, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of the types of work that we do, who all feeds into the group, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that people have about what we do and how to get in touch with us. And that's that.
Thank you, Asia. Any questions for Asia, please put them into the question box, and feel free to drop them in now. We can field them at the end as well.
Oops, and I stopped, maybe, oh yeah, my email is there. I'll put it in the chat as well. So you don't have to think of questions now, but feel free to reach out to me at any point. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Well, I'm going to talk about a project that NOAA West and the Regional Collaboration Network help secure funding for and do coordination for and kind of shepherd along during the course of last year. And I think it's an important illustration of how the Regional Collaboration Network can work across line offices to essentially deliver climate services, which is my day job. And they are an important kind of force amplifier. They can do, through the collaboration network, you can kind of reach across the whole agency in ways that sometimes is challenging when we're doing a kind of our within line office, within program, head down, doing the work that we're supposed to be doing. But when there are these kind of new challenges that pop up, especially in the climate services arena, I think the Regional Collaboration Network is a really incredible tool and an ally in trying to accomplish this. So I'm going to talk about this heat and equity pilot that we this year. So this slide is from NOAA's strategic plan, and you can see that map is actually the same exact map with different colors than it's the same map that Asia showed for the Regional Collaboration Networks, just slightly different colors. And so in each region, a different topic was taken up to work on climate and equity. And you'll see in the West the print may be very, very small, but we worked on heat health, and we actually worked with our colleagues in the Southeast as well, thinking about how NOAA can improve its products and services in this area. And heat in particular, I think, is a very pernicious equity issue. And this is from a relatively recent paper that shows the differences in the urban heat island intensity, those are on the x-axis, versus different demographic measures. And so in the top, it's a kind of racial ethnic combination, where the blue PDF, the blue curve, is for non-Hispanic white neighborhoods, and you can see they're shifted to the left, so they're on average cooler, and some of the hottest areas are not in those neighborhoods. Whereas if we look at different ethnic or racial groups that are not kind of the non-Hispanic white, so different communities of color, you can see the PDF expands to much warmer temperatures, and the average temperature is much higher. Interestingly, the PDF, if we look at a cut of income, looks almost identical. That richer neighborhoods and census tracts, I think they actually used, tend to be cooler than ones where there's lower income. So we know that there's a difference in exposure to extreme heat. The goal of the pilots, though, is not just to really describe the problem of extreme heat, but to really take up, I think, these subsequent questions. One is, how can NOAA do better to promote heat resilience and equity at the local scale? What about our service delivery and our products and services can we change or improve or update? Second, how can we help cities actually get to the implementation step? We have a lot of cities that recognize they have challenges with extreme heat, and they want to start taking action, and they're often trying to figure out what is the best bang for their buck, and how can they start to make some of these changes on the ground. And then third, and this is where I think some of the work that Asia mentioned about doing deeper dives with particular partners in the region, is who do we need to be working with? Who does NOAA need to partner with to build heat resilience and advance equity? In different places, different organizations and individuals are actually the managers of a lot of heat, or in some cases, there isn't a kind of christened lead for dealing with heat work. Some of it's owned in social services, some of it's owned in public health, some of it's owned in transportation or energy. And so identifying kind of who those groups are is important. And then a second part of this last bullet is, if we're really interested in building equity, how do we work with the community-based organizations that are really interested in that? Traditionally, those aren't kind of usual suspect partners. We work with a lot of emergency managers, we work with university researchers, sometimes we work with state and city officials, but we rarely kind of get into that more community-based organization, nonprofit world that often has a much more local set of interests. At the right are pictures. We actually worked in 4 specific cities, Las Vegas and Phoenix, those are the ones at the top, and then Charleston, South Carolina, and Miami. So I'm going to focus mostly on the western cities, on Phoenix and Las Vegas. And I'm glad to see some of the folks on the line from those cities, and welcome them to put stuff in the chat if they have additions or reactions to anything that. So who from NOAA was involved? I think this is where kind of the magic of the Regional Collaboration Network is. They were able to help us connect with groups all across the line offices. NIHIS, the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, played a huge role in these pilots. The Ocean Service, interestingly enough, even though in the West we weren't dealing with ocean states, they were involved because they've done training with these tabletop exercises that we used as kind of a key vehicle in the pilot exercises. NCEI, that's where I sit, and that's also where we got a lot of historical data from. The Western Regional Climate Center assisted with facilitation as well as some data products. The Weather Service played an integral role in all 4 of our cities in kind of connecting to a lot of local players. Sea Grant wasn't involved in our western cities, but they were pretty important in the South Carolina case in particular. So I'm going to go through the 4 steps of the pilot. And these are activities that all took place sometime kind of in FY23. So our first step, and this was probably the most time-consuming step, was just engaging locally and listening, really trying to find out kind of who's doing what on heat. And I have this little picture here. I have a 6-year-old, and this is something we have to work on a lot at home. But some of it was instructive for how we engage with new partners. And the list on the left are some of the folks that we were talking with, people who at the city or county level work on resilience, emergency management, public health, state climate offices, university partners, Kappa Strategies, which is a nonprofit that does a lot of heat observation work in partnership with NIHIS. They actually lead the urban heat island mapping campaigns that NIHIS has rolled out. Various NGOs and community-based organizations that are interested in heat and/or in equity issues in their respective cities. So once we got a feel for kind of what the state of play was in each of the cities, and it was very different from city to city, we tried to support different citizen science activities, or at least bring ones that had been ongoing, kind of elevate them to bear. So on the left is actually one of these activities that was already going on before we started the pilot, called Shading Dade, where various research projects in cooperation with the city of Miami have been putting sensors at bus stops and in parks and trying to understand where some of the hot and cool spots are in the city. In the middle is the Urban Heat Island Mapping Campaign, which actually happened last year at the same time we were doing this pilot work in Las Vegas, where folks volunteers would drive around for a day with temperature sensors on their cars, and Kappa Strategies uses that to generate a map showing kind of relative warming. And on the right was actually some work with infrared kind of guns, to take temperatures of surfaces in South Carolina. We didn't do that work in the West, but it was another example of a citizen science activity that was paired with our tabletop pilots. Step 3, and this was kind of I would say the keystone of our work, were these tabletop exercises where we tried to bring together this diverse mix of different public, private, academic actors in a particular city, present them with a hypothetical heat event, and then use that to think about, well, in the long term, kind of in a climate adaptation timescale, what does that mean for the steps that one could take, or that one should be taking to address the long-term risk? So a lot of these pictures, these are from various different places, but I'll talk more specifically about what those scenarios look like for the tabletops, and then what came out of the tabletops. So in Las Vegas, here's the picture of the attendees on the left. Our tabletop actually took place at the very end of 2022. So this picture up at the right, shout out to our friends at the Weather Service office there. They helped put this together. This essentially faux briefing for what an event would look like in May. And we wanted to pick an early season event, early in the heat season. And so we played out this event where not only was there kind of a sharp increase in temperature in May, but there was a pretty large scale power outage in the city. And on the bottom is actually from the Western Regional Climate Center and CNAP, the CAP-RISA in California, Nevada, that shows some of the looking at an event that was similar to the one that we proposed, how it increases in frequency and also earlier and later in the calendar year over time based on climate projections. So these are some of the materials that we shared. And the name Withering Daisy was a riff off of electronic dance music festival, spacing on the name, but that actually brings in I think close to 100,000 people, a lot of whom are camping outside, that takes place around this time of year. Interestingly, what we learned from the Las Vegas group is kind of noted in this first bullet. They actually do a lot of emergency planning and preparation in the city of Las Vegas. It's a place that hundreds of thousands of visitors are coming to almost every week. And for some big events like the Daisy Carnival, as well as things like the Super Bowl, they have a lot of practice with some of this. And so a lot of the attendees felt they weren't as concerned with these kind of big events as they are with, I think, the routine ones, or the ones that affect not so much the big concentrations of tourists, but those that might be missed for kind of the more disadvantaged populations within the Vegas metro area. Other recommendations or kind of take-home points from this tabletop exercise. They don't have a regional heat plan for Las Vegas or for for Clark County, and so there's I think a desire to have some sort of plan and to have a leader for that plan. They don't have a regional heat officer. A lot of the planning is actually led by the transportation planners, the Regional Transportation Commission that does a lot of the both transit and transportation planning for the region. There's also desire to expand the cooling center network. They don't actually, for a city of that size, don't have a lot of dedicated cooling centers, and many of them don't get activated until there is an excessive heat warning. So the kind of access and kind of number of places where you can get relief is less compared to other cities. There is a lot of heat island mitigation that's happening, especially around shading. And so these next two bullets kind of speak to that. I think a desire to also to measure, what are the impacts of shading, as well as to coordinate among different organizations. You have layers of jurisdictions. The city of Las Vegas is actually quite geographically small, and Clark County is very, very big. And so how are those two groups operating, as well as some of the other municipalities like Henderson, North Las Vegas, that are also in the region that are concerned about extreme heat. And lastly, I think there was a desire to grow literacy and awareness around our own heat products. We featured heat risk, and some of our weather service colleagues will be familiar with that. There wasn't, I think, a lot of awareness among the attendees about what that product means and how it can be useful. Same with hazard outlooks, maybe at the two-week time scale. And then also developing trusted messengers, that it may not always be scientists or weather service folks that are the best messengers for certain audiences. And so how can you kind of create a chain of messengers that could carry some of these important warnings or safety tips or kind of what to do in case of heat, those types of messages to impact the communities. Okay, so shifting gears to Phoenix, here's some pictures from our workshop there, and you can see Asia actually facilitating a breakout group conversation in the upper left. In the lower left is actually, in the middle there is Dave Hondula, who's the leads their Office of Heat Mitigation and Management for the city of Phoenix. In the upper right, former Weather Service Sue at the Phoenix office, Paul Iniguez, who's really built a lot of great relationships through the city between the Weather Service and different emergency managers and heat planners. But we had great turnout and very hands-on activity. And the Las Vegas one was, I think, the same case. We just had pictures of it in Phoenix. We had tweaked the format a little bit when we did this, which this one took place in February of 2023, where as we started to have the discussion and set the table around the event, which interestingly enough paled the hypothetical event we showed, we thought it would be a long-term heat wave, that it was 2 weeks of heat somewhere near 110, and lo and behold, this July they had almost a whole month of it. So we kind of were too conservative, I think, in presenting a scenario. That's just an aside. What the attendees kind of voted on was they kind of chose what breakout groups, what areas of heat management, heat mitigation they wanted to focus on. And these were some of the results from the polling that we really pursued the top 5 to ways to improve communication, coordination among agencies, thinking about public health resources, housing issues, as well as energy issues. And so by voting on those, then that kind of constrained some of the recommendations that they came up with to one for each of those areas. A desire in not just the energy space, but in kind of all built environment decisions to think about heat and equity on the front side. They feel like it's usually done as more of a retrofit, that things get built, development happens, and then, oh wait, how should we make this new development more resilient to temperature extremes, or how should we think about access and equity issues? So there's a desire to move it forward in the process, in terms of permitting and planning, and not just kind of after things are built. On the public health side, there was a lot of discussion about COVID and how that was treated as a disaster, and a lot of resources that would normally be in the emergency management space were diverted or were allowed to be used by the public health or health sector. And so there was a hope that perhaps that would be a model for thinking about heat. The interagency coordination discussion actually focused mostly in the emergency management sector, that heat is often not considered by emergency managers. It's more thought of as, well, we deal with the consequences of heat if the power goes out, if there's disruptions to infrastructure systems, then emergency management gets brought in. But thinking about heat planning more explicitly and having more coordination among emergency managers at different levels, whether it be local, county, or state. Housing is a huge issue in the Phoenix metro area, as it is in many cities in the West. And so there was a real desire to investigate some of the regulations that are there, and possibly thinking about strengthening cooling ordinances. In many cities, there's lots of things on the books about heating. If you're a renter, you essentially have to have functional heat in your unit, or else you have rights against your landlord. Different jurisdictions have different things down for cooling, and some not at all. And so there's a desire to try to protect, especially renters. And then communication. This was something that was very much echoed what came up in the Las Vegas setting, to try to improve communication and to do it with vulnerable groups as opposed to vulnerable groups, that you're thinking about kind of tailoring messages to the neighborhood level and using the right venues and the right messengers. So what did NOAA learn through all this? Obviously, the importance of communication that is really targeted to vulnerable populations, and that extends perhaps beyond just the traditional heat season. There's a wide mix of how we take data, and sometimes not just NOAA, but others, and do observations. And so I think there needs to be more about what, for cities that are just starting this, what are some of the best practices? There's still a lot of research to be done on the efficacy of solution options. One of the areas we hear a lot is, hey, not just the Las Vegas question of how effective shading can be, but reflective surfaces, especially reflective or higher albedo pavement, whether that is, to what extent that's an effective solution. And with shading in these cities, water is a real issue, so you have trade-offs with water availability. And then making sure that solutions meet the needs of the frontline communities, of those most vulnerable or most impacted communities. That there's lots of concerns in these communities: access to healthcare, transportation needs, housing access. And so to make sure that the heat kind of solutions also speak to those needs in those neighborhoods. We've also found a lot of value from the engagement itself, that we're building connections within cities as well as among cities. And I think that's going to pay us dividends as we continue to roll out other kind of climate ready nation type activities. We've also noticed that capacity and authority varies wildly from place to place. And we're trying to find ways to help, I think, cities in particular that are just starting off. How can they kind of jumpstart or leverage the experiences of the cities that are kind of farther along? We also have noticed this split between the emergency response and the longer term adaptation planning. And oftentimes I think groups are thinking about the same concepts, but at different time scales, and finding kind of the common ground where both can collaborate, I think, is really important. Okay, so that's all the work that's happened prior through our piloting. What's happening now, and I think into FY20, the rest of FY24, is passing off some of this responsibility and obligation to NIHIS, the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. And I think this is a great model, again, for how the regional collaboration network can be effective. We don't have the resources at the RCN level just across all of these line offices. We all have day jobs to keep this going year after year after year. But now we have, I think, a programmatic partner and a programmatic home that can kind of continue to do this work. And so the NIHIS is actually planning to do 4 additional pilots They're actually going to compete some of these. So for those of you out there who might be working in a particular set of communities or localities, stay on the lookout for doing another set of pilots where we'll repeat these tabletop exercises. Right now, the urban heat island mapping campaign call for proposals is out, and those things are due at the end of January. We found in many of these cities that urban heat island mapping becomes kind of the starter. That data becomes very valuable for doing a lot of heat planning. NIHIS is also planning to publish what they're calling a community heat planning guide. It's not up there on their website, not a heat.gov quite yet, but it will have 3 components. It'll have a how-to tabletop guide for cities to use and for us to use, for NOAA to use. We also have a heat governance model, which kind of lines up, like here is kind of a maturity of ladder, if you will, of how to kind of advance, or what are the aspects of advancement as you become more sophisticated at the urban scale for planning for extreme heat. And also a data collection and stewardship guide, which speaks to some of these numerous strategies for observing heat at the local scale. NIHIS also has a closed now proposal process for 2 centers of excellence, one on observations, monitoring, and evaluation, and another more on the assessment policy and practice side. Those 2 will be announced in the spring. They'll probably be kind of university type partners, but they, I think, will also carry the ball forward on some of this work. The bottom corner is actually, I think that's Dr. Spinrad. One of the visualization lab has actually created a way to look at heat mapping data for a city, and I think he may have been looking at Washington, D.C.'s data, but you can kind of fly through the city and see kind of the hot spots and the cooler spots. So, ways for you all to be involved. I think this is a good example of what I hope the Climate Ready Nation activity that we hear a lot about. I hope this is kind of what it will look like, that we're engaging kind of across line offices, we're working locally, we're taking assets from across a lot of different parts of NOAA, and we're trying to find ways to kind of get the most bang for that with our local partners. For those of you going to AMS, I encourage you to check out the 15th conference on environment and health. A lot of the people you just saw and organizations you just saw are actually going to be presenting on their work there, and a lot of great heat-related research is going to be involved there. If your community is interested in being an urban heat island city or a tabletop pilot city, then yes, you got opportunities to apply. Feel free to reach out. We can connect you to folks with NIHIS. The NIHIS national meeting will be in April. It's another great venue to learn more about heat activity. And also this little QR code, you can get the Heat Beat newsletter. It's not issued right now, but it's issued during heat season. It's another NIHIS product that's kind of useful to check out. And with that, I'll conclude, and we can take some questions, which start with our 13 minutes remaining. So we did have, oh, Mark, thank you for filling in. The festival in Las Vegas was the Electric Daisy Carnival, which, yeah, it was a good example of how we kind of need to engage and we need to learn about what things are going on locally. We thought it was a great example, and the local folks were like, no, that's not a good example of where we'd be worried about heat. Okay, we have another question. Can tabletop be adapted for drought planning for those of us working on rivers? Yeah, absolutely. So the tabletop exercise is really, we've adapted it from the emergency response world. So things like the Great Shakeout is an example where they've done it for earthquakes, and that's a very sophisticated one. But NOAA does these for oil spill response, hurricane response, lots of different events, and usually it's about getting emergency managers together to role play. In this case, we don't do so much on the response side, but we try to think more in that adaptation, longer time frame. But yeah, I think it could definitely be adapted for drought planning, and if folks want to take that on, that would be great. Go ahead, Asia.
I wanted to add, yeah, it's just some other models that people have used, and I'll put this in the chat, but there's the watershed game that I've heard of that is another sort of role-playing exercise. So I think a tabletop takes like a more serious view of this, but they've also developed these games that get people together to to sit, or people from diverse backgrounds and diverse disciplines to sit together to talk through what they might face in a number of different settings. So the watershed game is focused on, I think these are more focused on nutrient runoff and that kind of policy, or runoff policy or watershed connectedness policy. Oh, non-point source pollution, there, that one. So.
Thanks. Got another question. So you plan to revisit these tabletops in the coming years? Yes. We are continuing to engage pretty heavily with both, at least in the western cities, and I think the same is true in the eastern cities. And I think we want to make sure that there's action taken on the recommendations, both on the part of the cities and on the part of NOAA. As far as other locations and climate-driven incidences and/or climate-driven incidents that you're targeting. So for the other locations, NIHIS is actually going to open through challenge.gov a competition, and they haven't developed their proposal, but they want cities to apply. So rather than us kind of picking them, which was just happenstance from how NOAA leadership had engaged in those places previously, we would like the cities to kind of come to us. And as far as other climate-driven incidents, and I think this pairs really well with the previous question of droughts, I would love to see us develop more of these types of tabletops for other, for drought, for fire, for other things that kind of, for smoke events, for other things that affect us here out west. I think they're a really useful tool. For engagement, it's a kind of nicer way to present some of, in my opinion, our products and services when it's in this hypothetical mode as opposed to this just dry lecture, even though I may be dry lecturing right now. But I think we get really good reaction from local folks. So I would love us to expand that, but we don't have any specific plans that I know of to do that right now. Any other questions? And Asia, when you showed that picture of me, I actually wore that pink shirt yesterday, and I was really, really glad I didn't wear it today. Otherwise, it might seem like I only own one shirt, when in actuality, I think I own 2 or 3. So that's funny to see. Jokes aside, thank you everybody for your. Oh, we got another question. Good. How can people get involved in these tabletops? Where is there room for people who want to volunteer? Yes, especially for folks locally. We really relied on kind of our partners on the ground very, very much. So I would say for, let's say if you're in a fisheries office or a weather service office, and you're interested, find out if your community might be applying for either an urban heat island mapping campaign if they haven't done one already, or try to cajole some of the folks to apply for one of these tabletops if they're coming up. And even if you don't get awarded, because I know they only have bandwidth to do 4 this year, I think it's still worth kind of reaching out to NIHIS and having that kind of conversation, because I think they've been very slick about when they have a local group that's ready to go, they've been creative in finding resources either at NOAA or someplace else to help support those groups. So I would say, yeah, kind of reach out to some of the local folks that may be working on heat, and you can reach out to me or NIHIS folks if you want to get the next steps. But yeah, and I just encourage folks to also build their own awareness, whether it be through the NIHIS engagement opportunities or AMS or the NIHIS annual meeting. I think there's a lot of ways to kind of learn more about the heat work. It's it's staggering as a personal kind of awakening, the number of people, for example, in Maricopa County that are dying from heat in a given year, I think is competitive, if not exceeds, traffic deaths and homicides, either one of those categories. And we know the heat's coming in a place like the Phoenix area. We can predict it very, very well. It happens almost every summer, and yet we're dealing with somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 deaths, and that doesn't even speak to all the disruptions in work, kind of morbidity, kind of just the difficulties. And one of the areas that we're starting to think about too is kind of what the psychological fatigue of some of these events have been. I mean, I can say firsthand, many of these people who we do work closely with, you know, they were showing signs of really exhaustion by the end of July, you know, for how hard they were having to work. And I'm sure that was the case in, you know, Mark, in your area in Las Vegas and other places in the West that really experienced that during the summer last year. So it's been kind of staggering to realize the scale of this issue, and that certainly with climate change, it's not going away. Great. Well, thanks everybody for your attention, and have a great rest of your week, and enjoy the not heat for a little while.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate the attention too.